Welcome to the road to Acapulco. There's a new idea in town, an idea that's been heralded by Bob Podolsky for 32 years. It's an idea that will change the world, and it's beginning to take shape in Acapulco.
Welcome, everyone. Once again, another episode of the road to Acapulco. I think this is episode 8 now. We're
That's right.
Starting to move on up. Hopefully they're getting better as we go. You know, this is kind of a ragtag podcast crew, but we're doing the best that we can, and hopefully as things get going more and more, we're going to get better and better at this. But in the meantime, here we are once again. This is Michael Nimetz and the great Bob Podolsky. And today's topic, we're going to talk about something called the YESable Proposition. Negotiation is certainly a big part of any Octologue group, and it's certainly a big part of pretty much everything to do with anything along the lines of business or anything like that. But it's important, certainly in a circumstance where in an Octologue you have a unanimous decision. So putting things in terms of how everyone can accept a proposition is a very helpful thing to do. And so with that said, let me just turn it over to Bob. And Bob, why don't you talk a little bit more about what the YESable Proposition is?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, indeed. I learned about the concept of the YESable Proposition many years ago, and it intrigued me. And basically, I had read a book by Roger Fisher called Getting to Yes. And that's all about how to arrive at agreement in a negotiation. Roger Fisher is a professor, or he was, I don't know if he's still living even, but he was a professor at Harvard University, and he is often credited with being the person who taught many of our so-called statesmen how to negotiate with ambassadors and so forth. In particular, he's named some people that I'm sure you would know their names if you heard them, people who are known for their skill at negotiating, who learned from him how to go about it. And he pointed out in the book that most government officials, when they want to influence the behavior of some foreign government, they don't seem to know how to go about it properly. Instead, they make position statements. They take a stance or a posture, and they put that out in the world, thinking that the world is going to know what they want. And then they're surprised when nobody responds the way they want them to. So Roger defines, and by the way, I spoke to him personally. I actually traveled from Washington, D.C. to New York, and I sat down with him at the Harvard Club to actually find out what I needed to know about how to use this method. And it's a great method. And what he basically says is if you want someone else to do something, you have to give them a YESable proposition. So I asked him, well, what's that? What's a YESable proposition? What constitutes a YESable proposition? Well, the first thing is you have to identify the person whom you wish to see respond. So if I put a statement out publicly, the United States wants blah, 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 and I don't say who I'm talking to, I'm not going to get a response. Nobody's going to know that the request was addressed to them. The second thing is you have to identify the person from whom you are asking for a change of behavior explicitly. So, Michael, if I wanted you to do something different, I would have to say, Michael, would you please do the following? Then you would know that I'm actually addressing my request to you. You couldn't say yes to it if I didn't do that. If I just said, well, gee, I want something cold to drink. Well, who's that about? Nobody. But if I asked you to bring me something to drink, you would be able to say yes or no. So it would be the beginning of a YESable proposition. The next piece is a little more subtle, and that is that if I am going to ask you to do something, I'd better be able to give you a reason for doing it. Now, what often happens with governments and government officials is they'll give a reason like, the United States wants something different. Gee, I'm supposed to care about that? Some ambassador halfway around the world is supposed to care about what some bureaucrat in Washington wants? It doesn't work that way. What I have to do is I have to give you a reason for complying with my request that fits into your value system. There has to be something in it for you, even if it's only the satisfaction of doing me a favor. I have to give you a reason based on your values, not mine. Could be completely different from my own values and my own reasons. It has to fit your reasons. And if I can't think of a reason why you might want to do it, I might as well not bother to ask. So the YESable proposition is nothing more than a request made to a specific person for a specific reason in keeping with the values of the person being requested. That's it. That's a YESable proposition. And when you translate that into the Octologue setting, I'm sure you can see very quickly how it's applicable.
So, I've had a lot of experience, certainly making agreements with other people involved in business and so forth. But, I guess what you're saying is that you really have to observe and listen to the person that you're making the request to. You can't just demand something, and you can't just unspecifically suggest something with them with the understanding that it's their responsibility to take care of it. And so, I think the first thing, I suppose, that people might want to think about is actually listening to other people when they're considering something or doing something or negotiating with something, is look at the other person's point of view.
If I don't know your point of view, how can I possibly frame a question or a request in such a way that you will see value in complying? It's impossible. This takes us back to considering that in an Octologue, we have all the members of an Octologue have made a commitment to listen to each other, among other things. That's one of the commitments. We're going to give and receive feedback, and we're going to do so honestly, and we're going to be forthcoming. We're not going to withhold, and we're going to listen. That's the most important part. It's the hardest part to learn. And the examples of people not being willing to do that are extremely common. I see it every day, even here among the group of people, this wonderful group of people that we have here. I see many times when people are talking at each other and not listening to each other. And my usual response to that is to attempt to intervene. Hey, you two, you're not listening to each other. I'm sure you know what I mean by that. And, this is really, really what it comes down to, is mutual respect is an extremely important part of anything that involves more than one person at a time. If you and the person you're doing something with or want to be doing something with don't respect each other, the chances are slim to none of you actually accomplishing anything worthwhile. So,
yeah, I think that's a really important point, is that and that's really another thing about the Octologue is developing that mutual respect, and learning how to identify that and learning how that affects the way that a person perceives the environment around them.
Right, and until you do that, you can't even begin to perceive more of the environment. In other words, yes, I have to do that. If you and I are talking within a group of 6, 7, 8, 9 people, yes, we have to pay attention to each other, but what we do with each other is going to affect everyone else in the room. And that's another piece of what one needs to be aware of, that I don't just affect the person I'm talking to, I affect everyone in the room. And in fact, back in the days when I was learning hypnosis in my practice as a psychotherapist, I would oftentimes demonstrate hypnosis with one person while simultaneously hypnotizing everyone in the room. And I enjoyed doing that, and everyone in the room enjoyed it, even when they didn't know what I was doing. And that was very comforting and fun, and a great learning experience to realize that sometimes the person you're talking to isn't even the most important one to get the message to. So in a group setting, there are many things to take into account as one communicates, and this is part of why I really like working with groups. It's fun, it's challenging, and I grow a lot by doing it.
So most people, when they're doing negotiation, I guess the average person that encounters negotiations, or large negotiations, I guess I should say, are things like when they buy a car or when they buy a house.
Right.
And so in most cases, they're going up against somebody that does that every single day. And they really have very little experience. Mm-hmm. And so in that circumstance, let me just describe a particular instance. Let's say buying a car. Mm-hmm. A person goes in to buy a car. I don't know exactly what motivates most people to buy a car, especially a brand new car. But I've done a few of those in my day, and I probably wish I didn't when it was all said and done some years later. But in any case, the average person walks into a car dealership, and maybe they're looking at a particular car or a couple of different cars, and they encounter a salesperson. If they don't understand what the perspective of the salesperson is, if they haven't done their homework on what's the average selling price of the particular car that they have in mind, or they don't understand that the techniques that the average salesman might use on a person walking into a car dealership, they're going to be at a major disadvantage. And so in most cases, most people are going to end up paying a lot more for that car than they could have if they knew all those things, if they knew the circumstances that the salesperson and the sales team had in place, or what they're really after. In most cases, they want sales. They want to sell cars. And they want to sell as many as they can. So if they can sell one more car at the end of the month to make their quota, that's probably a good time to go and buy a car, by the way, right at the end of the month, or certainly at the end of the quarter, too.
Yeah, I remember once buying a car late in the afternoon, New Year's Eve. It was perfect. I got the best deal on a car ever.
Yeah, well, they've got some accounting tricks these days, but yeah, the end of the year is certainly another good time to buy. But in any case, utilizing this particular opportunity and then switching it to something like an Octologue, where an Octologue, you could essentially have one of those 8 people that knows how to negotiate and understands the ins and outs of what the salesperson at the car dealer is really all about. And so if that was the circumstance, essentially you don't have to buy the car anymore. You can get the person that's best at buying the car. In fact, you might even have an Octologue at some point that's a community Octologue that just does the buying and selling of big items.
That's an interesting idea, actually.
Yeah.
There's a business opportunity somewhere.
There's always a business opportunity when it comes to Octologue.
Right. And when it comes to buying and selling. Yes. As a matter of fact, I was roommates for a couple of years with a really good friend of mine who learned sales selling cars. And he relates almost all negotiations to the things that he learned on the lot, as it were, on the sales lot.
Yeah.
And I often heard comments from him about that. So you're absolutely dead on that the salesman is vastly more or better equipped to do the negotiating than the average customer. And yes, there are people who will hire negotiators to buy a car for them. There are actually, I've heard of services where people hire themselves out to go do the negotiating for them because they absolutely hate walking onto a car lot.
Yeah.
And I can see why with some of the salespeople out there. They are not all ethical. And a lot of them are trained to regard the sales interaction as a competition with the customer, where one of them has to win and the other one's going to lose.
Yeah.
And if you run into a salesman like that, you're not likely to be the winner unless you have developed some negotiating ability. And the YESable proposition is really a very valuable concept. I've used that concept many, many times successfully, and I recommend it to others. And I recommend the book, Get Into Yes. It's been around for quite a long time, but it's a very, very good book on negotiating. Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss concerning the YESable proposition? Or negotiating generally?
I would just like to say that, we're always talking about the Octologue and how it can benefit people. And I think this is just one example of how people can put into context the things that happen in their everyday life into a circumstance that they could see the benefit of using an Octologue. Mm-hmm. And then, further on into a holomat where Octologues are providing particular services that people could utilize. And being that it's an ethical organization, they can approach that organization with confidence that they're going to get exactly what they're asking for. Mm-hmm. So these are all kind of important things about the Octologue that I think as people get to the point that they understand what this really means for them, it means that you can spend a great deal less time doing the things that you don't want to do, getting, the most out of that time from somebody else, actually getting what you asked for from somebody else, and then being able to spend all this extra time that you no longer have to use doing all the, the stuff that you don't want to do the things that you do want to do.
Quite right. Quite right. I think that's a really good perspective. And it's just one more reason why people need the Octologue and why it's going to catch on. Because as soon as a sufficient number of people realize how good this is, and there's another piece of this that we haven't even talked about that I should mention. When you're part of an Octologue, you're not alone. And most people hearing that would say, so what? I'm never alone. I've always got family around me. I've got the co-workers around me at work and so on. It's not the same thing. When you're in an Octologue, your wishes and desires and aspirations and hopes and dreams are being considered and helped by all the other people in your group. You're not alone. You are embedded in a community that cares about you. And once you realize that, life feels different. Okay? I came down here to Acapulco from Arizona, drove down here alone, and I have never felt so included in a group as I do here. I mean, I've been in many, many, many groups. I've been in training groups, educational groups, workshop groups. I've been in professional groups. I've been in work groups in industry and in government. And I've led thousands of hours of therapy groups. And yet here I am, and I've only been here a few weeks, and I feel like I belong. I'm included. I feel confident that I have a place in this society. Most Americans never get that feeling of I belong. I'm where I need to be. I'm not alienated from my society. I'm a piece of the society, equal to anyone. Here, everyone coming into this group acquires that feeling. And that's hugely, hugely beneficial to the lives of all involved.
Yeah, I'd like to also add that, one of the things that I think we encounter, certainly libertarians or anarchists or voluntarists, they're a thoughtful bunch. They've got a very heady point of view, I guess, and to some degree, a lot of people could point to libertarians or anarchists or voluntarists and say their social skills aren't the best.
They're uncompromising.
And this is, I think, maybe one of the, and it's because, I think a lot of anarchists or voluntarists are skeptical. And that skepticism brings them to the point that they start to see the cracks in the system. And when it becomes apparent that there are some very large cracks in the system, that enlightens them to a whole new world. It's down the rabbit hole type of thing. But unfortunately, that kind of alienates a lot of people from the rest of their rest of the group, because most people don't want to spend the time to look at the cracks and go down the rabbit hole. They just want to get along. They just want to watch their sports, or they want to do whatever they want to do,
or fit in.
And so, to a large extent, that kind of the experience that a lot of people have that are in our shoes, that are probably listening to this podcast, will find themselves not getting that kind of social interaction that that the average person, I guess, gets by fitting in. And so, with this idea of the YESable proposition and with this idea of the Octologue, this is really the cure for that particular circumstance. That this is a way to solve that problem and to become the whole person that we all want to be.
Let me give you an example, because we haven't given any examples really, but I'll give you an example of the application of this idea that I recently had the opportunity to do. It was just a couple of weeks ago. I sat down with a young woman, by my standards, a young woman, who was complaining to me about her friends and family, the people surrounding her. And she was complaining, the word she used was she wasn't getting the support that she wanted from the group. Now, I don't know exactly what she had in mind by support, but I told her about the YESable proposition. And I asked her very specifically, have you ever approached the people whose support you want and asked them directly, face to face, would you please do X for me? Where X is whatever it is she calls support. And she hasn't. She never had. She confessed to me that, well, no, I just figure people know what support is, and if I'm telling people around me that I need some support, I expect people to just give it to me. And I pointed out to her that's not how people function. That's not how society works. The fact is that if she was able to define very specifically what it is that she needs, and then ask someone face to face and say, would you so-and-so please do this for me? She'd be much, much, much more likely to get the results that she wants. It was a whole new idea to her. It never had occurred to her that she could actually ask for what she wants, as opposed to hinting and posturing and complaining and bitching and moaning and doing the things she had been doing. I don't know whether she got the lesson or not. I don't know if it will change her behavior or not. But it was an eye-opener for her at the time that I said these things. And I would say them to her again if I heard her complaining again, simply because complaining in some generic way is like the government complaining about some other government. Oh, well, the governments of the world just aren't being supportive of us. Well, what's that supposed to accomplish, that statement? Who is supposed to think that you're talking to them? Same thing. I want my friends and family to support me. Really? Who do you include in that number? What form of support would you recognize? Have you not asked for it? Why have you not asked for it? What keeps you from asking for it? And to the listening audience, I say, if you want something, you damn well better ask for it, because if you ask for it, you might get it. And if you don't ask for it, it'll almost guarantee that you'll not get it. And that's not what you want.
Yes. And so, here again, we go back to why the Octologue is so important, is because this is the avenue to really get everything that you want. I think it was, and I know it was, Zig Ziglar who said, you can get everything you want if you just help enough people to get what they want. That is the perfect description of an Octologue.
I like it. I like it a lot. And it is perfect. It is right on. Right on. The Octologue is a mechanism to allow people to live the life they always wanted. And since I've been here, I've been telling my friends here, I'm now living the life I always wanted. It's perfect. I'm among people I like and care about, and I'm doing work that is meaningful to me and meaningful to the people around me. I'm seeing people's lives change and improve because of what I'm doing, and I'm having fun. What else could I possibly want? This is a kind of wealth that you can't get stuck in your wallet. This is a kind of wealth that is more important than money. If you have what I just described, you're going to be a happy camper, whether you have a lot of money or just a little money. All one really needs is enough money to pay for what one really needs. Beyond that is luxury. And as it is, I'm living in luxury because I've got everything I want. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? When did you, listeners, when did you last say to yourself, I've got everything I want. Life is perfect. Couldn't be better. But that's what it's like when you're part of an Octologue and it really starts to come together.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that you mentioned earlier, and I wanted to comment on, was the idea of complaining.
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of time on Facebook, and I watch my feed and what kind of information is coming to me. And honestly, this past presidential election, I was almost at the verge of just quitting Facebook, because it's just so much complaining. I just can't take how, and it's unfortunate that, the average American has got themselves wound up into this circumstance where all they can do is complain.
Yeah.
Complain about everything about their situation. How much money they're making, what's on television, the sports team that they got locally. The list never ends, and it's all about complaining. The circumstance that a person is given in the Octologue is a way to stop complaining, to actually start doing what you want to do, exercising whatever demons that you have, and letting those things go, and getting on to the things you want in your own life. We're in this, like as you mentioned, Bob, we're in a very nice circumstance. We've got a great community around us. We've got a beautiful vista that we sit here looking out over. And, life couldn't be better. But, we're doing what we want. And it's not a lot of money. Yeah. It's Acapulco, Mexico. And the thing is that there's people here that are in the very same situation that crossed the border with $50. So it's possible. all you have to do is want it.
Mm.
And then there's tools. There's tools like the Octologue. There's
action.
tools like the YESable Proposition that can give you all the things that you need
And
to
more.
get everything you want. And what's even better is that you can contribute to other people's dreams as well.
Right.
And I think that's really something that that propels or should propel a great deal of people, is the fact that they look valuable to other people because they contribute to their dreams. It's an amazing thing, and I can't contain my enthusiasm sometimes for the Octologue. I start every day with a statement on Facebook: Octologue.
Right, I've noticed. That's great. Well, I think that the YESable Proposition is one of an arsenal of tools that we bring to the Octologue. In other words, the Octologue can give you everything you want. So, to each individual listener, I would pose this question: what do you want? What would be the ideal circumstance of your life? Is it possible you could actually have that ideal circumstance? What would you be willing to do if you believed that you could have that ideal circumstance? Would you be willing to quit your job? Would you be willing to start your own business? Would you be willing to let people in a little more as to who you really are? Would you be more forthcoming with your opinions and your feedback to other people? What would you be willing to do? If you can answer that question in a way that includes some other people, you could be very happy in an Octologue. If your happiness requires that you be totally alone, Octologue's not for you. This is a mechanism whereby people come to feel they belong. They're no longer isolated. They're no longer insulated. They're no longer alienated by the society that they're part of. And when you get that, life is going to be different. Life is going to be dramatically different from then on. And you can have it.
There's one other thing I wanted to mention, and it has to do with the YESable Proposition and also an individual that sees the value of an Octologue, but doesn't know exactly where to start. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it starts with just one more person and a YESable Proposition.
Right.
If you can find that one other person that you can understand what drives them, what would make them interested in teaming up with you, that's the beginning of an Octologue. So if you can start with just one person and thinking about the YESable Proposition, grasp what their interests are and what their purpose is and what would be a YESable Proposition for them, mm-hmm. and then approach them with that in mind, I think you're going to find that that's the beginning. That's the most difficult part to the Octologue.
Right.
Is just that first step. Because then, once you have two people, both of you can work together to find that third person. And then the three people can work together to find the fourth person. And as you go through that process, you're also going to start to learn about how to make decisions as a group. So it really just starts with one.
Right.
And it starts with one understanding
Decision.
That they need somebody else.
Yes. I think that in order for that to work, there's a zero level. You've shown me the number one level is, okay, I am alone and I need to find someone else. But even before that, there's a level where it's just me and I have to decide something. Well, what am I going to have to decide? Well, I'm going to have to decide I want something, and I'm going to have to decide I'm willing to do something to get it. And this is one of the areas where many people that I've known in the past, most of whom were Americans, most of them never made that decision. They're frustrated, they're unhappy, but they don't actually say, well, this is what I want, and I'm willing to do something to get it. I think that we are taught through government schooling to be passive, to hope for what we want to come to us without effort. It's a certain kind of laziness that we have ingrained in us through the indoctrination of childhood schooling. And it's a hard one to get over. I mean, this is why it has taken this long for the Octologue to finally start to catch on, for having people say, oh, wow, that's neat. Can I do that too? But it's happening here. It's happening locally. Since I've been here, I've talked to a bunch of people who are only marginally committed to the Octologue. They were curious about it. They wondered about it. They heard good things about it. They heard your enthusiasm, but they really didn't know what it was. And so I talked to them, and they go, oh, what do you know? That sounds pretty good. I'd like to be a part of that. When you have the confidence and the enthusiasm of actually seeing this working, it's relatively easy then to engage with someone who's ready and get them on board. Now, you will also find there are people not ready. And for those people, there is no YESable proposition that is visible. There may be a secret one, but you've got to ferret it out somehow in order to actually communicate in a way that brings them on board. People have to be willing to say, I want something, and this specifically is what I want. Until they can do that, you can't really form a YESable proposition for them. So, test, probe, listen, talk, listen, ask questions, listen. Most of it's listening. And after a while, if you're talking to a real candidate for this kind of process, you'll find it out.
Well, there's one other test that comes in with wanting something, and that is it ethical? Is it a valid ethic that you're using? And so, let's say, for example, people say, I want a different president.
Mm-hmm.
Is that even an ethical desire?
I don't think it's ethical to want any president. I think it's unethical to set somebody up with life or death powers over someone else, let alone large numbers of someone else. I don't see that as ethical. I don't think that exercising power over someone else is ever ethical except in self-defense. I laugh sometimes when I hear that cops are complaining about the war on cops. There is no war on cops. The cops are waging war on the public. That's what's happening by any rational definition. And so when cops complain about the war on cops, my reaction is, tell me about it when there's hundreds of you being shot each month. Then I'll believe there might be a war on cops happening. But and that would be actually probably ethically justified in self-defense for people to fight back and kill the cops that are going around killing people with impunity. I think that would be ethical. Self-defense is ethical. But that's, most people can't see it until it's right under their nose or they're getting beat up or some such thing.
So I guess that is a little caveat to a person planting that seed is they have to understand that what they want to do is ethical.
Yes, and most people don't understand the ethics. So I urge you, if you haven't heard our first few podcasts, go back and listen to them because we explain those things. And it's not very hard or very complicated, but it does take a little bit of mental effort to understand what is an ethic, how does it apply, and what makes one ethic better than another, because they're not all created equal. Some ethics are valid, some are not. How do you tell the difference? Go back to our earlier podcasts and you find out. We're not going to repeat it now. My general purpose doing these podcasts is not to give the same message over and over, but for each podcast to have new information where people have already understood the earlier stuff. So if you haven't been going to the archive of our podcasts and listening to the first few, then you don't understand what we're doing. And I urge you to go do that, because it is a life-changing experience. Those of us who appear on this podcast, myself, Michael, and all the other people that appear with us on these podcasts and who are going to appear with us, we've all had a life-transforming experience by getting acquainted with this body of knowledge. And it's been very, very exciting. And you will find it likewise. You will be amazed at what you can do with this knowledge. And I recommend it. I feel sorry for the people that aren't going to do it. In the next 5 years, I can see where most of the people in the world are going to belong to Octologues. And it'll be a very different culture, and we won't need government, and everyone will know that. And government will be as popular as 8-track stereos or other defunct forms of technology, you know.
But if you are listening and you do get it, you don't necessarily have to listen to any more if you don't want to. I know. I'm certainly not the best when it comes to podcasting, and I apologize for my inadequacies. I am a big advocate for the Octologue, and hopefully my enthusiasm reigns through greater than all my inadequacies. So with that said, I guess we'll close this episode. Once again, thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more.
Thank you for being here. Get on the road to Acapulco. Bye for now.